Hey, what's up, card fighters? So today I want to go over how to play a rogue deck, or the things you should know while playing a rogue deck, at least in the competitive sense. Because if you're not really playing competitively, if you're just playing at locals or the kitchen table, play what you like. It really doesn't matter what you play as long as you like it and you're having fun, you're enjoying it. But getting into the more competitive aspect of how to play a rogue deck competitively, there's a few basic building blocks or key elements that you should know while playing a rogue deck in a more competitive sense. I think the I'm gonna go over the points that I actually wanted to go over last because I feel like these are the ones that do matter the most. So the thing that you should know while playing a rogue deck is that it's hard. It's really hard to play a rogue deck competitively. I started out playing this game rogue, but that was because I wanted to try and be competitive while I certainly didn't have the budget to buy the best decks. So I was just basically trying to be competitive on a budget. And it's hard. It's really hard to play a rogue deck competitively because it doesn't have all the amazing or awesome tools that the meta decks have. So you do have to work a lot harder to win your games, or get a bit luckier than your opponent, or hope your opponent gets a little bit unlucky in certain scenarios to beat certain decks, at least the meta decks. And that actually follows into the second point that's really important while playing a rogue deck, if you are trying to play it competitively, is that it you aren't really, not that you're not allowed to make mistakes, but I what I would suggest is don't make any mistakes at all if it's possible, because if you are playing a quote unquote rogue deck, a tier 3 deck, which is inherently weaker than the meta decks or even certain tier 2 decks, making a mistake against those matchups is just so much more punishing, to whereas it can be the difference between you winning a game and losing a game. To whereas if you're playing say a tier 1 deck, if you make one mistake or a few small micro mistakes, you can still not be punished as severely just because how strong your deck is. I remember back in the day, in V, because in V is when I started to try and play more competitively, was people would call this helmet decks, really good tier 1 decks that really didn't take much effort, or didn't care if you made small micro misplays, that they were just that strong that you could still just push through whatever your opponent had to win the game. So yeah, first it's hard, and making mistakes were the first 2 points I did want to go over, and then going on to a third point I want to more or less go over is that learning all matchups. If you're playing a rogue deck competitively, or trying to play it semi-competitively, let's say the first your first goal should be that you should know, at least you should know all your tier 2, you should know all the tier 2 decks by heart, and you should definitely know all the tier 1 decks by heart. Now what I mean is, knowing them by heart is, what do all their cards do, what are their lines of play, what is their correct lines of play, what is their weaknesses, and what are their strengths. Because it's very important that you do know these, because that's going to be very helpful to you in those certain matchups on, let's say, how, it could be the difference between you winning and losing, versus if you really wanted to win with Eugene, and you really want to win with Eugene, but you took no time or effort into learning how to beat Youthberg, or how to beat Ava, which is Eugene's worst matchup. Like, for an example, not to get too off topic, is Ava is Eugene's worst matchup, correct? Yes, correct, because you can't retire the upskew because of the grade 1 set order. But a way that you can get around that is, there is a card called Dragonic Overlord that its ability is on Vanguard and Rear Guard. When it attacks a rear guard, they cannot guard from hand. which means they can only guard with blitz orders or they can only intercept. So if you're attacking their interceptors with Dragonic Overlord, then you basically kill them. And you have Meteor Flare to take away their intercept, so they can't just intercept to stop the attack. So that would be, quote unquote, your way out or your tech for your worst matchup, which just consequently is a tier 1 deck. But yeah, it's very important that you know at least these. What I would say from my past experience, or maybe it's just because like I've been in the game for so long that I've just like retained so much knowledge on like certain decks, certain strategies, and like the do's and don'ts of those certain decks, is that you should generally know, at least have a vague idea of what every deck does. Because if you're playing a rogue deck and let's say you get matched up against another rogue deck and they you don't know what they do, they just kind of catch you by surprise and basically caught you with your pants down, which is one of your, what can I say? One of the benefits, might be the only benefit really, to playing a rogue deck is that your biggest factor to help you win games is that your opponent doesn't know what your cards do, or your opponent isn't as well versed in what your cards do versus you. You probably know what all their cards do if you've been preparing for the meta matchups. You know their weaknesses. You know how to play against them. You know if you need to rush them, rush them. You know if you need to grind them out, to grind them out and turn it into a resource game. And yeah, so that's basically the meta matchups, I guess. And another point I want to go over is, again, why are you playing this deck? Are you playing this deck because you're on a budget but you still want to be competitive? Are you playing this deck because this is your favorite deck and you want to prove a point? Well, let's delve into that subject a little bit more. Is this your favorite deck and you want to prove a point? You want to prove that you can still win with Chaos. You could still win with Jiva. You could still win with Eugene. I would argue that yes, but there's a lot more factors and checks and balances for you to win a game versus, again, your opponent playing a tier 2 deck or a tier 1 deck, versus they really only have one or two things to check off their checklist to win a game versus you have a longer list to check off your checklist. Did my opponent open broken? Is my opponent sacking me? Did I make any misplays? Did I make any misplays, or am I playing perfectly? Did I see all my pieces? Did I not see all my pieces? These are a bunch of factors that they do pile up and stack up against you inconsequentially if you are playing a rogue deck competitively. And that's why I used to be that rogue player. Like, I started this game playing rogue decks, but now that I'm more of a seasoned player, now that I've grown more throughout the years, I would say that if you do have the option, first off, play the deck that you are most comfortable with playing. That's like for starters. Play the deck that you know the best inside and out. But the second point that I would go over is, all the decks that you have in your arsenal, all the decks that you can obtain within your arsenal, within reason, monetary reason of course, play the one that gives you the best chance of winning. Which, if you are a budget player, that might just be your rogue deck, but you still want to try and be competitive and you still want to win. So, yeah, that's pretty much, I guess, all I have to say. Like I said, playing a rogue deck, it is hard. You do, I'm gonna go over these points again because of just these are just very important and crucial points to go over. Is that, number one, it's hard. Playing a rogue deck is so much harder than playing a tier 1 deck because you have to know all your plays inside and out. You have to play your deck perfectly inside and out, and you still might not win. Another point before I go. Another important point about playing a rogue deck is your best opportunity / best chance of topping a competitive event with a rogue deck is this. Number one, like I said, if your opponent doesn't know what your cards do, then it's very beneficial to you in that game or games that you're going to come out on top, because you have knowledge of their deck and you have knowledge of your deck, which they don't have knowledge on. But number two, the other point is, does your rogue deck not counter, but does your rogue deck do something that the tier 1 decks don't like? Like putting Lutetia and Youthberg in like, those are tier 1 decks. Lutetia, Youthberg, and Dragonic Overlord, in a sense. Those are tier 1 decks. All those decks do not like board control. So if you're playing Jiva, or if you're playing Eugene, decks that can very handedly just take control of your opponent's board and like leave them with like suboptimal units or a suboptimal board state, then that does increase your chances of winning, because you have a one-up on them, at least in that aspect and form of the game, that you could very heavy-handedly take care of their board. Now, I'm talking about from experience from this metagame, of course. But if your deck, your like rogue deck, taking into account its strengths and weaknesses, if one of your strengths just happens to be the weakness of at least the most played deck in the format, then that is a very key factor to you winning / topping major events with your rogue deck. Now, again, other meta decks like tier 2 decks that you didn't, tier 2 decks and even some tier 3 decks, that's why it's important to know every matchup. They still might give you trouble, and you still might not be able to beat them in like perfect settings and perfect scenarios, just because they might have opened up better than you. They might have trigger sacked a little bit more than you. Like, one thing to know about playing a rogue deck, I know I'm rambling, I know I was going to stop the video, but these are very important points that you guys should know. Another thing you should know about playing a rogue deck is that if, how do I put this? Against tier 1, you're playing rogue. You're playing tier 1 perfectly, your opponent is playing... No, you're playing rogue perfectly, your opponent's playing tier 1 perfectly. If the tier 1 deck high rolls you, it is very hard to win. It is very hard to win. I would say almost unwinnable if your opponent is playing perfectly with a tier 1 deck and they're also just high rolling you. That's a key thing to know about playing a rogue strategy. If you're high rolling and you're playing perfectly, that does up your chances of winning, but it doesn't guarantee a win. Versus if a tier 1 deck is playing perfectly and they high roll you, that does, especially against your deck, it does more or less guarantee them the win. And these are just key points and factors that you should consider while playing rogue or playing on a budget, but you still want to play competitive. But that's really all I have to say. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget that we do have playmats. We have my channel mat. If you click on my channel link, it'll take you to my profile where you can see my channel banner. That is the mat that we are currently selling on my channel. So please DM me on Facebook under BEO Cardfight Vanguard. Please DM me about details. We take PayPal, Cash App, and if you don't have Facebook, please, you could also direct message me under my email, all lowercase BEO Vanguard @gmail.com. But anyways, guys, later.